Well, Barry and I have gone to various places talking about this topic, and our process is that I will speak for about 20 minutes, and then Barry will speak. So I'll speak for about 20 minutes, and then Barry comes up and cleans up the mess that I've made and mentions anything that I've forgotten. And then I'll speak for 20, he'll speak for 20, and then we'll have some time to interact together. So, Jeff, could we get the map up there, the first PowerPoint slide? Okay. So this map is on the cover of our book, The Poverty of Nations, and the map is color-coded by wealth or poverty. The green countries are wealthy. They have a per capita income of more than $20,000 per year per person. The United States is 50, just as a point of comparison. The blue countries are medium income, China, Russia, much of Latin America. That's $8,000 to $20,000 per year. The red countries such as India are poor. That's $3,000 to $8,000 per year per person, total economic productivity. And the dark red areas such as sub-Saharan Africa are very poor, under $3,000 per year in 2012. Now the question is why, and what is the answer? There is only one effective solution to world poverty. It is the only solution that has ever worked or will ever work. It is evident from the history of every wealthy nation today, and it's consistent with the teachings of the Bible about productivity, poverty, government, and personal moral values. The Bible should motivate us to be concerned about the needs of the poor. Psalm 41 and many other verses encourage us. Psalm 41:1, blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. This book, The Poverty of Nations, however, is not concerned with how to help poor people. Maybe some of you have done that. You've gone on a mission trip, you've delivered food, you've brought medical care, perhaps if you're a medical professional, to people who are needy in poor countries. But we're not talking about that. A lot of good work is being done on how to help poor individual people in poor communities. We're addressing the question of poverty at the level of the whole nation. How do nations come out of poverty? And that's so important because if you think about it, what nation you live in is the primary determinant of whether you're rich or poor. If I meet you and you're an average person from a country and you say you're from Bangladesh or from Haiti, I think you're poor. If you say you're from Switzerland or Norway or Germany or Australia, I think by the world standards you're pretty rich. Why is it? Why is that? Why is it that the country in which you live is the factor that determines whether you're rich or poor? Barry and I are not aware of any other book before this in history that addresses the question of how do whole nations come out of poverty and does so from a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective. And as we research the Bible and economic history, we increasingly realize that most of what people hear today about solutions to poverty is sadly mistaken and proposes solutions that will never work. But these solutions get a lot of press. Imagine for a minute that you are an influential leader in one of these poor countries, even the blue ones, but certainly the red or the dark red countries. You're an influential leader, and you want to help your nation escape from poverty, and you aren't really sure what will work. You get all sorts of conflicting advice. People tell you you need to lobby for more foreign aid from rich countries. No, you need to lobby for debt forgiveness from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. No, you need to discover more natural resources. That's your way out of poverty. No, you need to redistribute money from the rich to the poor in your country and overcome inequality. No, you should print more money and stimulate the economy and get it going. No, you should blame colonialism. That's the real fault of, that's the real cause. No, you should promote fair trade coffee and get everybody to buy it at Starbucks. And Barry and I are saying, stop. There are two economic factors that you need to understand before we can make any progress in this discussion. The first factor, the first concept, first economic concept, is per capita income. I have that right up here in the title of the slide. Per capita income. Per capita means per person. And per capita income is the standard measure of whether a country is rich or poor. The question is, looking at this map again, how can you move a country from being poor, very poor, like Haiti at $1,300 per capita income, or Uganda at $1,400, or Pakistan at $2,900? How can you move it from being dark red, very poor, to a low middle income country such as India, $3,900, poor but improving? And then how can you move from that status to being a high middle income country like China with $9,000 per person, or Mexico with $15,000? Or how can you move from that middle income to a high per capita income country, Japan $36,000, Germany $39,000, United States $50,000, Norway $55,000. Now, we admit that per capita income doesn't tell us everything about a country. It doesn't tell us how the income is distributed. So if you look at this map, for instance, you see, does anybody know what this country is? This is Saudi Arabia. It's green, it's wealthy, it has high per capita income, but the income is all in the hands of the royal family, who build yachts, or buy yachts and build palaces and buy jet planes. And the mass of the population is trapped in abject poverty. So per capita income doesn't tell us everything, but it's still very important, because as long as per capita income is low, your country is going to remain poor, and the vast majority of people in your country will remain poor. So that's the first concept, per capita income. Second concept is gross domestic product, GDP, gross domestic product. This is the standard measure of what a whole country produces every year. Economics textbook definition, Greg Mankiw: the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a year. So if you add up the value of all the cars that were built in the country, all the shoes that were made, all the sweaters that were sewn, all the apples that were grown, all the potatoes that were grown and brought to market and sold, all the value, and all the teachers' classes that were taught and the teacher was paid, all the services, the doctor's exams that were given and people were paid, all the goods and all the services, take the total value, add it up, what's the total? That's the gross domestic product, or GDP. Now, why that's important is, in order to get per capita income, you divide the total population into the GDP, and that's your per capita income. Now let me give you an example. The country of Honduras in Central America has per capita income of $36 billion, and it has 8 million people. So if you divide 8 million people into $36 billion, you get a per capita income of $4,500 per year. It's a poor country. 8 million into 36. But just think for a minute, what if Honduras somehow could increase its GDP to 72 billion? 8 million people into 72 billion, now you've got a per capita income of $9,000. You've moved from low income to middle income. So the key is, how do you increase that GDP? How do you increase your total economic productivity in a year? The focus, therefore, of efforts in overcoming poverty in the world, and your goal as a leader or someone who's influencing a leader in a poor country, your goal should be keeping a laser focus on increasing the production of goods and services in your country. That's the only goal that's going to bring a country out of poverty. The question is, what will increase a country's GDP? This book, Barry and I started giving talks on 37 factors that will increase wealth and overcome poverty. Then we traveled in various countries and various states, and then we got more, and so we talked about 50, and now we have 78, and we found we miscounted, so second edition of the book, second printing, has 79. I think we're done. Factors that will increase productivity and prosperity within a nation. And those factors fall in 3 categories. Barry's going to talk a little bit more about these. The first category is the economic system. Is it a free market? And we define what that is. The second category is the government. Is it serving the people and accountable to the people? And the third whole area of a whole collection of factors, over 30 factors, is the cultural beliefs and values in a country. Are they progress prone or progress resistant, the values and beliefs that people have. So those factors are what we believe, if they're implemented, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 30, 70 of them, 79 of them, the more they're implemented, the more they'll help a country increase its production of goods and services. If I were to summarize this book, The Poverty of Nations, in one word, then the word would be hope. Because our message is there is hope for poor nations. Some have come out of poverty in the past, others are doing it right now, and here is how it has happened. Now I want to talk quickly about some other goals that people have suggested that we think are wrong goals. Some people say the way out of poverty is more aid, and Jeffrey Sachs, who works to give away United Nations money, Jeffrey Sachs is the primary proponent of giving more foreign aid. But the truth is that no nation has ever escaped poverty by means of foreign aid. Foreign aid given through the governments of poor countries usually does more harm than good because it entrenches corrupt rulers in power. It fattens their personal bank accounts, and it foments civil wars over control of the nation's treasury and the aid money. Economists like William Easterly, Paul Collier, Dambisa Moyo, and others have written about the harmful results of foreign aid. Dambisa Moyo, a Zambian economist who got her doctorate at Oxford and worked for Goldman Sachs for a time, is an internationally known economist. Dambisa Moyo says, stop the aid. It's doing much more harm than good. The Bible supports the idea that nations must produce their own prosperity. When Israel came into the Promised Land, God did not promise them perennial donations of riches from other nations. God promised them hills filled with iron and copper, which they would have to dig and refine, and fields of vines and fig trees, which they would have to tend and harvest each year. In other words, God's blessing of prosperity would come by productive work. In fact, the manna from heaven ceased the day after they ate the first harvest in the Promised Land. You could say they did receive celestial foreign aid for a time. But once they were in their own land and could grow their own food, the foreign aid stopped, even that from heaven. Joshua 5:12. Even the poor in Israel had to work for what they got by gathering the gleanings that were left at the edges of the fields. There is no thought in the Bible that poor people or poor nations were to become dependent on donations from others year after year. To repeat, no nation has ever escaped from poverty by means of foreign aid. Now, you might be thinking, what about sending gifts of food, medical care, and other things to poor countries, or even going on medical missions to poor countries, or building, as our church does, a well or a school or something? These things are important because they meet urgent needs, but they're not given through the governments of the poor countries. They're given directly to people, and so you avoid the corruption problem that comes with the governments. But they still are treating the symptoms, not the cause. If you give food to a person, you send food, a shipment of food to people in a poor country, you meet an urgent need, they're hungry. But you're not solving the problem. The problem is the country is not producing enough of its own food. That's the only thing that's going to solve the problem, if they produce more of their own food. You send a doctor, you meet an urgent need, somebody's sick. But the problem is the country is not producing enough of its own medical care. So the question is how to increase the productivity of those things. And be careful, because such aid, even charitable donations, can create dependency. What about debt forgiveness? No, forgiveness of a nation's debts is not the answer either, because it's just more foreign aid carried out by a two-step process. First the loan, then you cancel the loan. It's not the correct solution. What about natural resources? Should a country aim to discover and extract more natural resources and come out of poverty? Too often, natural resources become a curse. They lead to civil wars to gain control of the government and control of the immense money that comes from oil or minerals. And it's not the answer to poverty, because many nations in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and many nations in Latin America have immense resources, but they remain poor. Well, some wealthy nations, such as Japan, you see here in green, or South Korea, or Taiwan, or Singapore, or Switzerland, they're all, I didn't have South Korea on my list. I'm not sure about its resources. I take that back. Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Switzerland all lack significant natural resources, but they've still become wealthy by creating distinctive, productive economies. They've produced their own prosperity. Foreign aid is not the answer. Debt forgiveness is not the answer. Natural resources are not the answer. Number 4, transferring goods from one person to another is not the answer. What's your name? Tylen? Tyler and Ryan. If Ryan has 2 shirts and gives and Tyler has none, and Ryan gives 1 shirt to Tyler, that's a good deed. It's agreeing with John the Baptist's injunction in the Gospel of Luke. But it doesn't increase the gross domestic product by 1 cent. Because before you gave the shirt and after you gave the shirt, transferring goods or money from one person to another doesn't touch the GDP. Printing money doesn't increase the GDP either, because money is not itself a product of value. People can't eat money or wear money or drive it or plant it. They can't put it over their heads to protect them from the sun or rain. They can use money to buy other things. It's a medium of exchange, but printing money doesn't increase the GDP. 6th, blaming poverty on outside factors does not increase your GDP. Long discussions in our book about the history of colonialism, mixed history, about the world economic system, world market prices for goods, multinational corporations, rich nations. The analysis of these is complex, but the question should be not what has happened in the past or how can we blame someone else. The question is, what can you do now? What can you do now looking forward to continually increase your production of goods and services? The main point then, the main goal for overcoming poverty must be produce more goods and services. This will bring a nation out of poverty. Now you may say, well, that's good, but that's just theory. These nations can't do that. Nations can't make themselves prosperous. Has it ever happened? Oh, yes. See, if we could back up this map, this has 2012 figures. If you could back it up to about 1750, a little over 250 years, the whole map of the world would be dark red, very poor. There were a few wealthy noble families and a few wealthy, unusually successful merchants and landlords, but for the most part, everybody was poor. And then in the late 1700s, beginning with the Industrial Revolution in England, some nations began to produce more and more. Their factories produced more goods and services. Their farms produced more food. Their per capita income doubled. It quadrupled. It kept on increasing. The leader was Britain, producing textiles, especially cotton, faster, cheaper, and better than anyone in the world. Many other manufactured products followed, and soon after, North America and other nations in Europe began to produce their own prosperity. But it didn't end in the 1700s and 1800s. In 1900, Japan was a poor agricultural economy, and it grew to being the world's second largest economy in the late 20th century by manufacturing cars, computers, TVs, cameras, steel, and ships. And then South Korea. If I can find something. Here's South Korea. South Korea is green on the map. South Korea went from being one of the world's poorest nations, poorer than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, in the 1950s, to the 12th richest country in the world today by manufacturing TVs, cars, and microwaves. And Chile, here in Latin America. Chile will be the first country to come into the green or wealthy country status. Chile is growing by producing abundant fruits and vegetables for export, and maybe the last apple you bought said grown in Chile. China is growing by producing millions of small manufactured goods. Every nation that has escaped poverty has done so by producing its own prosperity. And speaking as a theology professor, I do not think that creating wealth or producing prosperity is morally evil or materialistic. I do not think it's morally neutral. I think it's a morally positive activity implied in God's command to subdue the earth, have dominion over it, in Genesis 1. For example, I forgot to bring this up from my briefcase, but I went into a store near our home in Arizona, and they were selling these little plastic discs. You might think it's probably worth 5 cents worth of plastic. And I thought, or you might think, what's this for? It could be a tiny ashtray if I smoked, but I don't smoke, so. But when I went in this shop, a man put it in a machine, and it came out the other end, and it was a $100 lens for my glasses. And he put another one in a machine, and it came out the other end, and then it was left lens for my glasses, special kind of bifocal, adjusted exactly so that I could read small print. Every time he put one of these through the machine, it added $100 to the GDP of the United States. There's $100 added. There's another $100 added. He produced wealth from the resources of the earth, created wealth that was not there before, and I can see. So how can poor nations produce more? They have to have the right economic system, they have to have the right government, they have to have the right cultural beliefs and values. Barry will talk more about those things, but I want to close by saying one more thing. We have 79 factors that bring a nation from poverty to prosperity, but the last two, we say, are the most important, because you can become materially wealthy but spiritually poor. And so in our list, under the 35 cultural values, number 34 is the society counts family, friends, and joy in life more important than material wealth. And we have to admit that, if we're honest, many of the poor countries in the world do better at family and friend relationships and joy in life than we who are prosperous. And we don't want them to lose that. We want to say to them, don't lose those things where you're doing well. Hang on to them, but produce prosperity. And then the 35th one, the last one, is the society counts spiritual well-being and a relationship with God as more important than material wealth. Barry Asmus and I do not believe that material prosperity is the most important issue in the world. Jesus taught love for God and love for neighbor are the two greatest commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love for God and love for neighbor are the two most important things, not material prosperity. But if we are talking about how to solve world poverty, the solution can only come through increased economic productivity within the poor nations themselves. And that's what we're talking about. Our hope is that these cultural beliefs that lead to governmental systems and economic systems that are productive, our hope is that those cultural beliefs will be addressed by pastors who have vast influence in poor countries. Barry and I, Lord willing, will be in Uganda next month. But also by teachers, by missionaries, by government officials to some degree. Conclusion: there is only one effective solution to world poverty. Poor nations must produce their own prosperity. The good news is that many are already doing this. The better news is that all poor nations are able to do this. But tragically today, as the map shows, millions of poor people around the world remain trapped in lifelong poverty. This is not because people in rich nations are rich. And I've just been doing some analysis of Ron Sider's book, Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. His subtitle gives his thesis, moving from affluence to generosity. He thinks the problem is wealth. He thinks the problem is affluence, and he thinks the solution is sharing. It's more generosity. I think Ron Sider is just wrong on two things, the problem and the solution. He thinks the problem is affluence. I don't. Barry and I don't. We think the problem is some people are poor, not that other people are rich. The problem is not affluence. The problem is poverty. And the solution is not you rich people should share more. That's generosity. That's his solution. Move from affluence to generosity. No, the solution is not sharing more. It's not generosity. The solution is productivity. It's producing more. So poor nations, people in poor nations are poor, not because people in rich nations are rich. People in poor nations are poor because the nations in which they live are living under oppression. And ultimately, I think there's a dark spiritual enemy of God supporting that oppression. They are oppressed by economic systems that tell a lie because they cannot bring prosperity except for a tiny despotic elite. And they're oppressed by laws and governments that cannot bring prosperity except for a tiny group of privileged rulers. and they are oppressed by dominant cultural beliefs and values that perpetuate poverty and cannot produce prosperity. We believe this book, The Poverty of Nations, gives hope. We believe it shows heroic leaders in poor countries 79 specific steps that will enable them gradually to set their people free from these oppressions, have the freedom that God intended them to have, so they will increasingly produce their own prosperity. That is the only solution to world poverty. Thank you.
Should I grab some of that for you, Wayne?
No, it's all right. I'll manage. I'm going to take that water bottle, though.
I think if you've never had an economics course before, and that might be some of you for sure, it probably never dawned on you when Wayne said that 300 years ago, the whole world was dark brown. I mean, it's just hard to believe from the beginning of time, and we move through the thousands and thousands of years, no change. Grandma and Grandpa lived liking, no change, no change. So when you really do reach a point where countries can get a lift, so Wayne and I are asked all the time, if you could tell countries one thing, if you could tell them one thing. Well, one thing for Wayne and I would be our chapter 9, the 35 factors in chapter 9. The one thing would be that, interestingly, Christianity, Judeo-Christian, is progress-prone, and most religions are progress-resistant. Wayne and I can say with confidence, in Haiti, you will be poor forever if you continue to practice voodooism, because voodooism is progress-resistant. We can say to the Hindus, there's some beauty about the Hindu religion, for sure. But one thing we know is you're born into a caste. They don't believe in change. When India was colonized by Great Britain, they were going to build railroads, and they did build railroads. And so Britain brings in thousands of wheelbarrows to help carry all the heavy rock and steel and everything that you need to build railroads. The Indians wouldn't use the wheelbarrows. My parents carried weight on a basket on our heads. We're going to carry it on our heads, and we're going to build these railroads with baskets on our heads. No, all I can say there is when you're against the wheel, you're progress resistant. So what's fun for me to travel with someone like Wayne, very well-known theologian throughout the world. He's a rock star in every country except his own. It's so joyous to stand and look you guys in the eye and be so thrilled with a lot of what occupations that you're choosing, because to be honest with you, you can start recoloring this darn map when you introduce Christianity. So many principles are so right on the money. God, thank you. Thank you. You didn't mislead us in Genesis. You didn't mislead us in Revelation or anywhere through the Bible. So that's an absolute joy. So go to it. Go to it. Now, as an economist, it's just so fun to team up with Wayne, the theologian. Because as an economist, let me give you a shot at how an economist looks at this. We realize that the poor of this world have some housing, but they don't have a title to that housing. Now, hang with me just a minute. The poor of the world grow some crops, but they don't have a deed to those crops. Hang with me. The poor of this world have some small businesses, but they don't have articles of incorporation. What have I said? They don't have property documents. You have to have verifiable addresses and property documents, or there's a good chance you just can't get out of poverty. So what a thrill it is to meet with various leaders who've, the last thing in the world that they think of is, well, my country needs some verifiable addresses. I mean, it's the last thing on your mind, except indeed they do, because without a title, without a deed, how do you get collateralized? In other words, once you give me a little property document that I have a little house here and it's not worth much and it's wood and it's almost ready to fall down, but I put a fence around it and I paint it and I do this, and it adds a little value and adds a little bit more value, and the next thing you know, I've got some collateral, and now I can go to a bank and borrow $100, and they say, what's your collateral? I own the house. See, so we have property documents on our cars. We have property documents on our homes. Not one of you got up this morning. Dear Lord, thank you for property documents. Not one. And I get it. Why you wouldn't? But details. And it is an important detail. Well, economists have a number of things like that. And this has been so fun. I've kind of stepped out of the industrial world, so to speak. I've been speaking to Fortune 500 companies for about the last 25 years. It's been a great ride. I've come to Louisville many, many times to speak to the General Electric company and others in Louisville. So it was fun, but I'm old now. I'm 72, been married for 52 years, and I got married when I was 20, Wayne. But, so I'm just thrilled to step out of that world now and step back into the education world. So I'm doing a little teaching at Arizona State for a professor I know out there, and a little teaching at Grand Canyon University, and then kind of every week I'm teaching a class at Arizona Christian University, ACU. It's not nearly like as big a deal as Colorado Christian University yet, but it's coming along, and so we're having some fun as we're doing that. But just to be with young people, is it so invigorating. This is the truth. I teach on Thursdays from about 1 o'clock till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I get home and my eyeballs are this big, and I'm so fired up I cannot sleep. And my wife says, what are those students doing to you? Sweetie, they're so smart. They're so invigorating. They're so much fun. They ask so many good questions. You know, they just don't have any respect for titles. So it's great. I'm loving this experience. Though I gain the whole world and lose my own soul, what does it make? No difference. So, what a joy to enter into other people's lives and introduce them to the Savior of this universe. Introduce them to the God, the Creator God of this universe. Introduce them into a book that is true truth. Sanctify them with the truth. Thy word is truth. What a joy it is to come into that book and see this is a God that has searched me, and he knows me. He knows every detail about me. He knows when I'm going to stand up, when I'm going to sit down. He knows every word I'm going to speak before I've even spoken a word. I mean, there's nothing he doesn't. He's everywhere present. I go up into heaven. He's there. I go to hell. He's there. I take the winds of morning and go to the deepest part of the ocean. Even there, his hands will hold me. His right hand will guide me. He formed me in my mother's womb. The Creator God of this universe, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the world. You've created the sun, the moon, the stars, and human beings in your image. Oh God, thank you. What are we that you even care about us? What are we that you would even come down and want to save us? Not only are you our Savior, but you said, look it, I am going to endow you with some stewardship responsibilities. Created us a little bit lower than the angels, and yet have given us honor and glory. God, that's not deserved by us. We can just bend our knees and say, thank you, thank you. And so Wayne and I say thank you. for this seminary and this place. We're so thankful for this place. As we flew here from Phoenix today, we thought there's not a place that we would rather be than to be with you all. Lifting your spirits, lifting your heart, helping you grow closer and closer to Jesus, and also understanding some of the wonderful things that God has said in his word about thou shalt not steal private property. What God has said about tons of things. In fact, so far in my class, I've taught 5 weeks, and we skipped chapters 1 through 8 of the book. We're going to now go back and cover chapters 1 through 8, but we've been kind of on chapter 9 for 5 weeks. Believe me, there's enough to talk about. The values. The values. Do you know how lucky, fortunate we are to have the values that have imbued through the Word of God? True truth changes us, makes us. God, thank you. So we can hardly wait for tomorrow. We're going to both get a good night's sleep. Wayne and I got up at 4 o'clock this morning to fly here, and but it takes a little while. It's not just across a little, well, it's a ways. But we sure invite you out to visit us at Phoenix Seminary. I'm at Arizona Christian University. Come by and say hi. But we're so glad to say hi to you, and we're going to go through a few of the chapters tomorrow of the book, and I know in just a few minutes that I get to be with you, you're not going to walk away being economists. But you are going to walk away saying, you know, I've never thought that division of labor and specialization and free trade were so important. Yes, they are. Isn't that funny? So we will share some things in economics and in theology that will really be fun and hopefully lift your hearts, lift your life, and make you more informed. And then when someone of your congregants someday say, why is such and such a country so poor? Why are they so poor? You will have some pretty good answers for them. And if you don't have them, you'll get them out of the poverty of nations, okay? So, Wayne, we'll take some questions.
Sure.
And I know that was abrupt.
You surprised me.
And usually I go long.
Yes.
Yeah, Wayne always
You
tells
earned credit for extra time later.
Thank you. Inevitably, we've done lectures in a lot of countries, and we'll give, 20 hours? And Wayne always reminds me as we're going, now you're going to go from 7 to 7:24, so you'll be done. And not one time in all the time we've done this do I even come close to finishing. So
Amazing, but now we have Q&A and
there we go. Okay.
We actually have more time than we planned for interacting on what we've said, and you can get into any of the specifics if you want or whatever. Matthew, you look so familiar, but you were a student of mine at Trinity. Yeah.
So I have 2 questions. Number one, your emphasis is on growth of GDP, but for example, in a continent like Africa, the population is so large, even if the GDP grows, this is where the population growth in most of the world is taking place. So it seems to me that would be a really important factor as population control. So even if you raise GDP, if the population also grows, your per capita income is still low. So it seems a huge factor in the world in terms of poverty is population.
In my example, I held the population of Honduras constant at 8 million people. Now, it does grow somewhat over time. But it cuts both ways, because when nations become more prosperous, their birth rate declines because their health systems and prevention of disease increases. Children don't die as much. People don't have as many children, hoping that 1 or 2 will survive. And so if you look at these wealthy nations of the world, their problem is low birth rate, actually. United States, except for immigration, is that way too. So
let me take a shot at
go
that
ahead.
too. You're talking about 1 billion people in Africa. Let me give you a little feel about how large a country. You could put 3 United States in Africa. In fact, 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Africa is Sahara, the desert. 1/3 of Africa is 1/3 of Afri Secondly, I like so, and just there's just a little less than a billion people. So that's that's quite a few people, but it's a huge land space. But the point I want to make is the wealth of a nation is not its resources. The wealth of a nation is its people, men and women created in the image of God, who know how to think, create, design, make, produce, and entrepreneur. That's how God created us. So the point is, human individuals add more back than they ever suck out. So it won't bother me at all if Africa will get its act together, that it will even go to 2 billion people. It's already 1 billion people. So it's not the number of people per se that's killing us. It's the lack of productivity of many people in Africa. So we're going to talk a number of things about Africa tomorrow. Let me mention just one of those. One of the problems with tribalism, and that exists almost all through Africa, is that everybody's business is nobody's business. When everybody owns it, nobody owns it. See, we over here say, no, private property. It's yours. I just got done saying titles, deeds, or title to who? That's my title to that house. That's my deed, that's my title to that car. You've given me a property document. And now I can do something with that property, add to it, paint it, create it. And that's what humans do. And the next thing I've added some value, and that economists call that collateralization. See, the problem with poor people in this world, they cannot get collateralized. They have some housing, but they can't get collateralized because they don't have a deed, because they don't have a property document. So back up, the wealth of a nation is its people, creativity, and that's where and everybody has the potential to do that because everybody is created in the image of God.
I don't know if does that help, Matthew?
Well, I just think, number one, the world is finite. Two, there's finite resources. But three, it just seems to me that there's a direct proportion of the number of people in the country to which wealth. So four countries that have extremely high birth rates, and it's not just
India is densely populated, I admit, but
yes.
so is Manhattan.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to the rest of the country, those
Well, yeah, but the Netherlands is very densely populated, and some other European countries.
And when
Singapore has immense density population, one of the most wealthy countries in the world. So what happens is dense regions can produce their own prosperity.
But when you talk about finiteness of the, running out of resources, this sounds counterintuitive. It just isn't true. It's just a concept made up in intellectuals' minds that it's finite. Look at. We've been using oil like crazy. Up until 10 years ago, we were importing 65% of our crude oil, and then it was going to be 70%, and then 80%, as you all know, therefore subject to Mideast and Venezuela and a few other places. And then all of a sudden, there's this guy named Mitchell that say, hey, why are we stopping at 3,000 feet? Why don't we drill down to about 10,000 feet? And oh, by the way, when we get those bits down there at about 10,000, why don't we put on a bit of a curved bit and turn that bit? And now we're not only vertical drilling, but now we're horizontal drilling. And now this bit now is crawling along the top of some shale. And so we put some explosives on this thing, and we bam those explosives, we break that shale, and all of a sudden there's oil and gas like you have never seen. In fact, all the Oklahoma and Texas oil wells are producing more than they've ever produced in their history because of this fracking. So what was not a resource yesterday becomes a resource tomorrow, and that constantly goes on. The price mechanism allows that. When the price gets high enough, people have to find alternatives, and they do find alternatives. So the finiteness is just a concept that will not hold up. We think we're short of water. Are you kidding me? 97% of the world's water, so all we really need then to do that is desalination, and to do that we need electricity. Okay, but you're going to say, well, a more fossil fuel, but wait. It looks like that we're going to generate all our new electricity in the future vis-a-vis natural gas. Not oil, not coal, not nuclear, but natural gas. I got to tell you something. Generating electricity using natural gas is about 1/3 cheaper than either coal or nuclear. So, see, that's just the way life works. Yeah, God has given us plenty of resources. It's just a matter of us discovering them, finding them, mining them, and turning them into something very, very useful. So we do cover that in the book about the finiteness of. So I hope you read a few pages, but I'm not sure I convinced you. But we're having some fun.
Barry, I read a while ago that there was a frost in Florida and there's going to be a shortage of oranges. Aren't we running out of oranges?
At a certain price, we'll run out of oranges. But the interesting thing is that's what happens there is, okay, here's the supply curve. Here's the supply curve of oranges. And when you have that frost, the supply curve moves this way. That is, the price of oranges are going to go up. And when the price of oranges go up, you and I consume a few less oranges. It's the way life works. Incentives matter. Incentives matter every time. So you have this automatic mechanism going on to obviously always bring supply and demand into equilibrium. I know I'm sounding a lot like an economist. I hate
that means we're not going to run out of orange juice.
That's what it means.
Wow.
Of course we're not going to run out of
Good.
orange juice.
Good.
Okay.
I was curious, as you're talking about the churches that are going and building wells or whatever, is there anything you're encouraging them to do while they're there or as a body to add to the GDP? Is there really anything they can do?
We're encouraging people in churches to talk to friends in poor countries and say, look, to the extent that if they've got 5 minutes to say, look, is there a way you can increase your production? If you've got an hour or two, then bring this list of 79 factors, which we just passed out. So, because if people understand what the solution is, then they will start communicating it. There's something else, and that is if people say, is there anything economically I can do? And especially people who have larger resources, more wealthy Christians, we've said, and Barry and I know some people who are doing this, don't give money to Africa. Invest in for-profit businesses in Africa. Because if you invest in a for-profit business and it makes a profit, the people are proving by buying the product that it's meeting a need. It's doing good for them. So that's also a concrete step.
The church, I think, constantly wants to err on the side of helping people to become helpless. But unfortunately, helping people to become helpless is not an act of kindness. People do not need a sweater. They need a sewing machine. People do not need a hand out. They need a hand up. And so there's things that, like a rich country like the United States can help in being the hand up. Micro loans, et cetera, there's a way. But at the end of the day, if we're in, it was just shocking to me. Wayne and I's church, Scottsdale Bible Church in Phoenix, we've been active in Tanzania for about 15 years. We've adopted the whole village. Every kid in that village is going to have a college education. We're already now up to the 10th grade. Every kid has been doing that for 10 years. And so they're going to have college education, and that's exciting. But here, we built 4 water wells. You need fresh water, no question. Half of our diseases are water-borne diseases, so fresh water is wonderful. So naturally, we built 4 water wells. This guy Stan talked to me and says, so, are you from America? Yeah, hard to figure out, right? Yes, sir. Scottsdale Bible Church? Yes, sir. You just destroyed my business. Excuse me? Yeah, I build water wells. That's my job. I do water. And your church comes in and builds them for free. How do I compete with that? Let me tell you. Up until that moment, no, I mean haughty in a good way. Haughty, 4 water wells. Yeah, I'm kind of proud. Really? Sometimes helping people to become helpless is not an act of kindness, especially if you're going to drive this guy out of business. Do you see the point? So it's better, like I say, they don't need a sweater as much as they need a knitting machine. That's my main point there.
How do environmental concerns factor into this model? For instance, it seems like to get from where the blue countries are to green countries come at an enormous environmental cost.
Wealth, increasing wealth, protects the environment. So it's the solution, not the cause. And the thing that comes to mind is, I have it not in this book, in a book called Politics According to the Bible. I've got some graphs of the soot and sulfur dioxide pollution in London in the 1600s or 1500s was very low, and then the chart increases because London is getting more businesses, more industry, more people, and more coal burning, and the pollution rises until they reach a certain point where people say, no more, enough, we've got to control this, and then they start becoming more efficient in their control of pollution. And the pollution in London now, in the soot and the smoke and the sulfur dioxide, it's what it was before the 1600s. It's amazing. You can walk there and breathe now. And it happens in country after country throughout the world. Up to, I don't know, is 8,000. Do you know, David, up to what point it starts to turn to $8,000 per capita income or something like that? So countries that are in the coming into the blue range, they're going to be fairly not real careful about pollution. But once they reach a certain per capita income, country after country after country, the pollution begins to go down. And
China is choking to death on coal.
Barry and I were there, and in Beijing you can't breathe.
You can't breathe in Beijing. They're choking to death.
Outside.
Okay, but now watch this process. Now that we're going to natural gas to do, did I take it off of me? To do electricity, this is wonderful. To do a coal-fired generating plant, you need about $1 billion plant. To do a nuclear plant, $1 or $2 billion. To do generating electricity vis-a-vis gas, you need a little 10 megawatt generator. So all of a sudden, you make electrical generation way, way more possible. So what's going to happen in China? They will begin to generate their electricity using gas, and once they get off of coal, that's going to clean up their air by about 2/3, right there, just that. So I will say in the next 20 years, you're going to see China way, way less pollution than they have now, because the technology and gas and smaller generators are not having to do it vis-a-vis coal-fired generating plants is why it'll clean up. Technology allows you to spend money to clean up. And certainly you can clean up a lot of the pollution at a certain cost. When you get to the last few percent, that's where the cost really gets high. And that's where then you just make a choice as a society. How clean do we want the air to be? And if we want it to be pristine, absolutely clean, it's doable, but costly.
Where does educational aid fit into this? If churches want to do something and providing education for a village in Africa or providing education through child sponsorship, is that a viable way to provide it?
We do say that one of the factors that is important in increasing productivity is some form of compulsory nationwide education for men and women both. Muslim countries, that's one of the belief systems that hinders productivity. In Muslim countries, they still have a female illiteracy over 50% in a number of countries. So education for both men and women. Why did prosperity increase in Northern Europe, Norway, Sweden, England, other countries in Northern Europe, Northern Germany, far earlier than it did in Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, Portugal? Because Northern Europe had Protestants. And Protestants taught their children to read because something was important, which was
Scripture.
the Bible. They wanted both boys and girls to be able to read the Bible for themselves. Italy, Spain, Portugal didn't teach people till many. Now, today Catholics promote literacy, but in the 1600s they didn't nearly as much because the Bible was in Latin and the priest could interpret it for you. So it was a different philosophy. So education is important.
So Italy, Spain, and Portugal, then you just transfer that over. That's mainly South America. And you bring 150 miles of London and come, and that's North America. And all of a sudden, this is by and large Catholic. Catholics have always, not all, Catholics have never been that excited about the free market. They've never been excited about capitalism.
Well, Acton Institute.
Yeah,
Father
Robert
Sirico.
Sirico,
Yeah.
he's an exception. But the main difference, North America, South America, Protestantism says work hard. Protestant says time matters. Protestant says history is going somewhere. Protestant says we bring glory to God when we work. He loves it when we work. We're supposed to work. Down here, they have a bit of a different idea.
Or historically did by the colonization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the Roman Catholic Church today has mixed messages. Father Robert Sirico endorsed our book. He's at the Action Institute and promoting free markets and productivity and things. But the current Pope, sadly, is from Argentina.
Yeah.
And Argentina, Barry and I have this book called the Index of Economic Freedom. It lists 176 countries of the world by whether it has a free market or not. And out of 176 countries of the world, Argentina is down at like 170th out of 170. It's way near the bottom. It's not quite as bad as Cuba or North Korea, but Argentina is horrendous in terms of lack of economic freedom and lack of protected property rights and stability of the economy. And so the current Pope sadly grew up in what maybe he thought was a capitalistic or free market system, but he didn't. He grew up in a horribly distorted example of it. And he has a deep concern for the poor. I believe that's genuine and heartfelt. But when he opposes free markets, I think he's opposing the only thing that's going to solve the problem. So what's your name?
Chelsea.
Chelsea?
Yes, okay, so I was wondering if it's helpful for the people in England to vote for the Pope to be like anti-free market and keeps them in power, helps keep them in power. Do you think they might do that subconsciously even? And then also I was thinking of asking how I could like take the risk of becoming entrepreneur, because like it's all scary for me, the whole thought of generating my own income.
Okay. I didn't quite understand where you're going with England and the Pope, because the Church of England is Anglican, not Roman Catholic. So, but let me leave that to a side. Okay. But you feel scared about becoming an entrepreneur? Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are different kinds of people in the world. Some kind of people love taking risks. Mm-hmm. They will say, I'm going to be a baker. I'm going to bake 100 loaves of bread at 3 to 4 a.m. before anybody's come in and bought a loaf. And I'm going to take the risk because if people don't buy it, it's going to go stale and I'll lose my money. But I love taking that risk. And they become the people who build businesses. There are other people who have a temperament that says, I don't like taking risks. And they become professors.
Or teachers.
It depends
And
on who you
that's
are.
why Wayne and I'll always drive a very small car.
But you could say that earning a wage is a form of creating wealth. So
Sure it
that-
is.
So that young
Oh,
newer
yeah.
topic, but if
Oh,
you're just gonna
have you ever
everything
worked for a
that
business?
Yes,
What business?
T-Mobile.
You worked for T-Mobile. So you help people get phones. You help people talk to each other. So you were helping produce the wealth of the world, the value of the world. Well, good. All right. Thank you, David.
Additional GDP.
Right. David Cotter was a student in my classes at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, came here and is just finishing up a PhD in New Testament, now already teaching in Colorado Christian University, but he knows more about economics than I'll ever know. And he's very
you know,
helpful.
The question back there, tomorrow, let's jump on that some more. That environmental question, isn't this kind of economic growth going to be environmentally detrimental?
No.
Thanks. Yeah. But probably very few in this.
We
any
need
group.
to deal with examples. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
the environmental problem?
For example, the greatest blue red ribbon trout streams are near Bozeman, Montana. It's where the Madison River, the Gallatin River, and the other river come together to form the headwaters of the Missouri, and then it moves towards North Dakota, and then down the Missouri River and over to the Mississippi River. But anyway, that little cumulative, the best trout streams anywhere. Now, to have good trout streams, you've got to keep the dissolved oxygen levels up in those streams, or those trout will not survive. That is to say, you can't get too much pollution in any of those streams, or there goes the trout fishing. So the biologists come in and say, okay, here's the dissolved oxygen levels we want in these streams as they're all coming together. And so in other words, you can maybe do a little polluting, you can do a little polluting, and we're still maintaining the dissolved oxygen levels. But if another polluter wants to come in, say, wait. Unfortunately, that's gonna change the composition of that stream. So you're gonna have to buy some pollution rights. Would you be willing to sell some of what you're polluting to him or not? And then a market takes place. They buy it right. So they've kind of competitivized that the whole all those stream beds. The fishing has never been better, and yet you are allowed to pollute some, but not totally.
So Barry, you're saying as countries become more wealthy, they actually take care of their environmental problems?
I think so, Wayne.
Wow, that's amazing.
Sets me up.
Yeah. Jen.
You don't force the you don't force the trading until you put a cap on the environment, until you realize your own stewardship and you realize the value of the land, and you say, this is more important to me than the manufacturing, that I keep this stream clean, or I
Yeah,
keep this air clean.
yeah,
and you set
that's right.
that
Yeah.
somewhere.
Jen sat next to me on the airplane this morning coming out of here. Yeah. That's really important. It's a political process, isn't it? It's when people get fed up with breathing smoke or smog in the air that they elect people that say we're going to put some regulations here. And so with the trout, when people started the trout dying out, then so it is a political process. And you need both, yeah. And the government, it's probably in one of our 79 that it is. Government protects against the destruction of the environment. So we agree with that. Yeah.
Your stewardship.
Yeah.
Just regarding our country, our nation, obviously it's grain. You brought up Saudi Arabia. That's extreme. Where does our wealth, I mean, I'm not making $50,000. My wife's not making $50,000. It doesn't work at all. So, I mean, if that's per person, we're one household. Even if I was making it, she wasn't, that would be, what, $25,000 per person, right?
Okay.
Per capita.
Yep.
And I make it drastically less than that. So
Right.
it's far, far lower. I'm not poor by any means, but, we live in America. But I'm saying, like, where does, we've got Google, we've got Apple, we've got these massive companies. How much percentage of our wealth lies in these type of royal families?
Yeah,
that
yeah.
own the money?
Yeah, and you really raise a really good question. Look at. Let's say we have a little town in Nebraska, and it's poverty-stricken. Everybody is like you and you're not poverty, but anyway, is poverty-stricken. Okay, but the little town is only about 50,000 people. Okay, and now Warren Buffett from Omaha moves into town, and someone says, Well, this town doesn't have to worry anymore. Everybody's a millionaire because on the per capita. So that's why these all of this is you got to be very careful as to really how you use per capita and GDP, because all of a sudden one guy comes into this town, Warren Buffett, he's worth 80 or 100 billion dollars, and now you divide that by the per capita and everybody is a millionaire, but everybody isn't a millionaire. So you really have to break it out by composition. But isn't it interesting to look at the United States and first of all, we've got dozens and hundreds and thousands of millionaires. We've got maybe 1,000 billionaires in America, and so there's no question that helps. That's why yours skews it down and a billionaire skews it up. But would you not admit that you and your wife eat well? Would you not admit that maybe you even have 2 cars? I don't know. Maybe you do. Yeah, or actually one. Okay, one car. Air conditioning, maybe air conditioning, and
No, I'm not saying.
I know. But no. Of course, I know you're
No,
not.
we're ridiculously rich compared to everybody
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
Okay, I want to make one more
I was
point.
just curious as far as what
But your
percentage.
question raises a really important point, and that is there opportunity to increase your
Yeah, no,
income?
absolutely, yeah.
And that's the question of income mobility. Now, there are more recent statistics, but here's from 1975 to 91, 16 years. If you divide up the people in the United States by the poorest 20%, or 1/5, and the next poorest 20%, the next poorest 20%, divide them up into 5 groups. Over a 16-year period, of the people who were in the poorest 20%, the lowest income group in the country, 98% of those after 16 years had moved to a higher income group. And the next quintile up, the next 20%, 78% had moved to a higher income group. And the third quintile, 58%. So the poor don't always stay poor. See, but what is it? What is it that takes people from the very poorest income group and makes them up second, third, or fourth quintile? It's well, for one thing, it's poor seminary students who aren't earning any money, and then they actually get a job. Okay, or it's college students who aren't earning anything and they get a job, or it's medical school students who are earning 0, and then they're up to the fourth quintile all of a sudden because they're doctors, or it's business people who start a business, like, what's your name? Chelsea going to do, and and they take no income from that business for 3 or 4 years because they're building the business. They're living off savings, so their income tax is 0, and they're in the first quintile. And then all of a sudden they start taking income, and they're making tons of money. So there's a constant churning. That's the question of income mobility. It's really important that there be income mobility. But in order for this to happen, one thing we say in our book is you've got to see examples around you of relatives, uncles, aunts, neighbors, friends who have moved from low to high. And if countries if they prevent anybody from getting rich, you don't see any examples. I'm thinking of a guy that we knew when we lived in Illinois. He was an Eastern European immigrant, didn't speak very good English. He'd become a millionaire by putting in hardwood floors in people's houses in the suburban area around Deerfield, Illinois. All of a sudden, all the Romanian friends of his, they're saying, he did it, I can do it too. But if a country, and there are many African countries where people have said to me, if you start to build a business, there's a couple that had a vegetable market in Nairobi, Kenya, they said it's really hard to build a business because in a number of African societies, if you get a little more money than somebody else, all your relatives and friends want a share of it. And if you don't share, you're ostracized socially, you have no more friends. And so all of a sudden, the country prevents anybody from even becoming an example of income mobility, and you freeze it. So I guess the message of our book is the answer to poverty is complex because human behavior is complex. Many motives, many encouragements, many discouragements, many factors. And so that's why we went to 79 factors. But it falls in basically the economic system, the government, and the cultural values.
When we get to talk in poor places in America, unlike Louisville, but in poor places, saying things like, get married and then have children, that makes huge sense for your future. Get a job, stay in a job, work hard at the job, even if it's a minimum wage job. Keep working, keep working. There will be a payoff. Therefore, get work, get married, stay married, because what we really find in poor places in America, the average person in that household doesn't even have a part-time job. They don't have a part-time job because they can get welfare, they can get this, they can get subsidies from government, and so why get a job? I get a bigger government check at the end of the day than actually having to go to work. And so the Bible says that work is good, that we should work. And isn't it wonderful that God says that even a person that's a janitor is every bit as important as the person that stands behind the pulpit and is giving a sermon? God doesn't see that difference. So it's wonderful and a great encouragement for all of us to work. But the beautiful thing about America is this is constantly churning. And you didn't mention, Wayne, that a lot of companies that are millionaires today are gone.
31% of the top quintile fall lower.
Yeah.
In that 15-year period.
Yeah.
So people don't stay there rich forever either. So I think we're out of time, Ken. Did you one more? Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Brazil, one of the BRIC nations.
Yep.
And I read Hernando de Soto's book, The Mystery of Capital.
Yep.
And in it he talks about the Crystal City. It's very similar to the property documents conversation that was going on earlier. And my question is, where exactly does that process start? Can you identify?
Where does the process of property ownership start? We were in Albania. We met with the governor of the Bank of Albania. We met with the prime minister of Albania and the chief economic advisor. In conversation with the governor of the Bank of Albania, Albania is the first country north of Greece, and I said to him, "It's just here." Yeah. And I said to him, "You have beautiful coastline. You have beaches. Why don't you do what Greece does? Why doesn't you have Sheraton and Marriott and Hilton come in and build fancy resorts and begin to get a tourism industry?" And then the governor of the Bank of Albania said, "Nobody can get secure property rights." So before communism, people owned it. Then communists took it. Then the communists gave it to other people. And then sometimes 3 or 4 people owned it. But Barry, if Ken will allow a minute, Barry can tell how we got property rights in the United States because of Thomas Jefferson. Do you mind saying this?
Yeah, in 1787. This is just a few years after the Declaration of Independence. So here 1 minute, Thomas Jefferson is saying, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, i.e. the Declaration of Independence. Now just a few years later, guess what he says to America? This is going to be a country of property owners, and we'll never ever be property owners unless we survey it, so we need a national survey. So they drive a stake in East Oberlin, Ohio, north, south, east, west. Everything is factored off of that. Sections, regions, and now no matter where you travel in America, there you see those straight 36 miles, 6 miles by 6 miles, 1 mile by 1 mile, 640 acres per mile, and so on. So then, my Russian grandparents who came to Ellis Island in 1900, ended up in Michigan, milk or dairy farmers. They said, "We're not dairy farmers. We don't know anything about dairies." "Well, you said you're farmers." "No, we're sugar beet farmers." They shipped them by train to Denver, Colorado. Grandma and Grandpa get out of the train in Denver with kind of a knapsack on their back. They start making their way along the Platte River. They wandered along the Platte River for 3 months and find a little town of Hill Rose, Colorado. 15 people. And Grandpa and Grandma says, "This is where we want to set up shop." And so, by the way, when you survey the whole country, mile by mile, 36 by 36, the county assessor and tax people and the government officials are all in Section 16 all through the country. So where's Section 16? So here my grandma and grandpa, they want to say, we want to build a fence. We want to start developing this. We're going to irrigate this land, and we're going to make something come out of this. And they go to Section 16, put for a few dollars down. Grandma and grandpa buy a little mound of dirt and put a fence around it, put a little house on it, start growing some crops, start bringing in some water, blah, 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 and the rest is history. By the way, your parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, same story. So I'm not telling any unique story here. That story can be told 1,000 million times over. That's how it starts. You have nothing. You're digging out of rattlesnakes. That's all we've got here is rattlesnakes. And then you move from there, get water on it, get collateralized. And when Grandpa died, had 6 farms. 6 farms of each 160 acres each. 160 acre, 6 of them. That's what happens if you work hard. So
And you have property rights.
And property rights. Property documents.
Ah.
So now, so let me say something to you all. You're going to be known by the books you read, the lives you live, and the friends that you have. For those of you that have an entrepreneurial bent, meet. Right? Get some addresses. Me, if Wayne was a great entrepreneur in Phoenix, I'd want to get to know him. And you should want to get to know him. If you have an entrepreneurial bent, on the other hand, theology, loving Jesus, which is even more important than an entrepreneur bent, here's your man. Sorry, Wayne.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Can we express appreciation for